You've had a chance to think about the different dimensions of both constructive and destructive conflict. I want to take the opportunity to speak with you a little bit about it. When you were doing the exercise, you probably realized that some different ideas were coming into your head when you thought about the word conflict. Um, this is completely normal, and for a lot of people, they come up with ideas that are really very destructive first. They come up with words that have to do with war and human suffering and death. And then you also probably came up with some words that didn't have to do with those types of images, that had to do more with conflicts that were waged in a way that led to positive outcomes for people and individuals and groups and societies. And my question for you is, where do we really think that those images and those ideas come from? You weren't prompted in any way to come up with certain types of words, so where do they come from? What I'd suggest to you is that we all carry around a certain amount of baggage when it comes to conflict. And that means that we have certain preconceived notions that have been built inside of us that come from essentially four different areas. And those four areas really are the first one is family, which of course is a huge influence on us and affects our worldview, whether we agree with family or disagree with family. It really affects us from the earliest beginnings of our childhoods. The second one is schools and education, formal education, which teaches us lots of things about the world and that we absorb from the time we're 5, 6, 7 years old. It shapes our view of history and events and cause and effect. And we tend to come up with a lot of ideas about what conflict means and what are appropriate responses to it based on the lessons that we've learned in schools. The third one are the religious and cultural groups that we belong to, which in many cases have very strong messages around norms of how we should engage in conflict and how we should behave towards other people that are somehow opposed to us, or other groups that are that we perceive as opposed to us. And the fourth one is the most modern of them all, which is media. I think you all can easily come up with examples in your own lives, whether it's from seeing print on paper media or television or the many, many forms of social media that exist today, all of which communicate certain messages to us and some very strong images that imprint upon us ways that we think about conflict. Some of you may have come up with some images that really harken back to certain things that you've seen in media that have made you think certain ways when you hear the word conflict. Then at the same time, there obviously are images that you may have gotten in your head that are not quite so disturbing, not quite so violent, and it would be an interesting exercise to think about where those images may have been imprinted upon you. And as we move forward in this course, this is something that we really want to think about, because how we engage in conflict. Peace building literature fundamentally says that this is a choice we have to make. It's not predetermined. We do not, as humans, necessarily need to respond to violent or aggressive behaviors with more aggressive behaviors or violence. There's very little science that suggests that that's true about humans, either as individuals or as groups. So I think beginning to unpack this for ourselves is actually a very important part of this endeavor that we're undertaking. The one idea I do want to leave you with here is that peace and conflict are not a dichotomy. They're not two sides of one coin. It's very possible to have peaceful societies that have many, many conflicts occurring within them. The question isn't really about whether there's conflict, it's about how we respond to it, right? Whether we use violent means to engage in conflict, or we choose other means. In a sense, I like to use the example of nuclear power, which in and of itself is neither positive nor negative, but of course can have hugely positive or negative consequences depending on whether we use it to build a weapon or whether we use it to power a city and produce life-saving energy with it. So I want you to really take some time to think about that and think about the fact that conflict inherently does not mean that it is going to lead to unpeaceful outcomes. Um, the very last point I'd like to make is about the whole sort of enterprise of peace building as we understand it today. It's really quite a modern enterprise, academic discipline, professional undertaking, however you choose to look at it. As little as 70 years ago, you wouldn't have heard any mention of peace building, certainly not any recognition of it in either academic or professional circles. And so it's important to remember that a lot of the field is still very much in formation. A lot of the terms are still being worked out, and a lot of the theories are still being developed. So I think that makes it exciting for people like us, for researchers, for practitioners, because we're not only just learning about a field, we're contributing to it as we practice it. And that's very important, whether you are thinking about the earliest conceptions of peace from the ancient philosophers of different societies up to modern conceptions of it that we hear in academic circles or at the United Nations or in other governmental or non-governmental organizations.